Hello to everyone and welcome to this webinar titled Advocating for Access to Treatment. What should we know? My name is Vallone and I'm involved in a Spanish NGO called Masquilias Foundation that is member of Lung Cancer Europe, LuCE. For those who don't know LuCE, this is a non-profit association that provides a European platform for organizations supporting people affected by lung cancer. One of the main objectives of LuCE is to advocate policies that lead to improvements in prevention, early detection, treatment, and care. And we are going to talk on this webinar that, as we are going to talk on this webinar, there are new novel therapies in lung cancer that have brought hope for patients. But the truth is that there are some disparities in the accessibility of these medicines across Europe. And LuCE is committed to fight against these inequalities. The purpose of this webinar is to improve the skills and knowledge of lung cancer patient advocates to reduce inequalities and get fast access to novel therapies across Europe. Some LuCE members cannot attend this webinar, so it's being recorded and will be uploaded on the LuCE website. Today, it's a pleasure to have three speakers who will share with us their knowledge and experience about this relevant topic for all who work representing patient rights. But before presenting them, let me do a brief explanation about how you can participate, asking questions or sharing comments. As you can see in this slide, you have two ways to do it. Writing your message or question, and I will read it for you. Or if you have microphone and want to say something, you should press the hand button, okay, as you can see there in the slide. Remember that now all of you are mute, so we can't hear you. But if you want to say something, raise your hand and we will activate the sound to listen to you. We want to propose you to wait at the end of the three presentations to ask questions to the speakers. But do not hesitate to write and send me the questions before that, and I will read them at the end. However, if you need any clarification during the presentation about, for example, something that you don't understand, write your comment and also write the word urgent. In this way, I will know that the question must be asked in that specific moment. As I told you, we have today three great speakers. On behalf of Lung Cancer Europe, thank you. We want to say thank you very much for your time and for sharing with us your amazing experience. Our main speaker today is Ananda, Chief Executive Officer of Myeloma Patient Europe. She is responsible of the project European Atlas of Access to Myeloma Treatment. This project aims to quantify the differences in treatment availability across Europe and try to identify its possible causes. So Ananda knows very well the topic and the challenges ahead. But before her presentation, we are lucky to have also to Tanja Cufer and Stefania Vallone, who will share with us some data and insights about access to treatment in lung cancer from the medical and patient perspective. So if you agree, we start with Tanja Cufer. She's a medical oncologist, professor of oncology at medical faculty from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, and senior counselor at the University Clinic Golnik in Slovenia. Her major scientific interests are lung and breast cancer and molecular biology of cancer. She plays an active role in new drug development, and she has been principal investigator in more than 20 multinational clinical trials. Author of more than 200 articles, books, and book chapters in the field of oncology, she is also a member of several editorial boards and a reviewer for numerous international medical journals. She is very active in national and international societies like ASCO, and currently she is also chairing lung cancer division of the Pulmonary Patient Association of Slovenia. As you can see, a great professional experience. She will tell us how is the current situation of access to lung cancer treatment in Europe. So Tanja, thank you so much, and I invite you to start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Diego, for this nice introduction. First of all, a nice hello to everyone. It's my honor and pleasure to be with you today and to be involved in the very important discussion on how to improve the access to treatment for lung cancer patients in Europe. So, Diego, I would like to have my first slide.
Okay, yeah.
So, lung cancer is still the most common cancer worldwide and also the most common cause of death due to cancer globally. During the last decade, major improvements in the treatment of lung cancer have been made. Targeted therapies have been introduced into treatment of lung cancer, which improved survival rates. So lung cancer is becoming a treatable disease. With the introduction of immunotherapy during the last 2 years, further improvements have been done. So more and more patients could be treated for a long period. The patients are living longer and the quality of life is much better. But the patients need the access to treatment to live longer and to live better. Here there are the data from the Mutation Consortium in US. They first introduced targeted therapy based on the targets you know probably about the EGFR mutations, ALK rearrangements, important targets and subtypes of lung cancer that led to the introduction of the very effective targeted therapy in a routine clinical practice. As you can see on the right side of this slide, even in a real-world practice in my country, with the introduction of the targeted therapy in the routine everyday clinical practice, and here we are talking for the period 2010-2013, only about EGFR-directed therapy, only one targeted therapy, the median survival doubled for our patients. So major improvements. And as I said, with immunotherapy, new targeted therapy, even further improvements will come. So lung cancer will become or is already a very, very treatable and also curable disease. But the patients all over the world need the access to effective novel drugs. So on the next slide, you will see the results of the ESMO survey. ESMO is European Society of Medical Oncology, and in 2014 they did a marvelous survey that has been published in 2016 in Annals of Oncology about the availability of the drugs for all cancers, not only for lung cancers, in Europe. They separated data for so-called Western Europe and Eastern Europe. 20 Western and 25 Eastern European countries or representatives of the countries have been interviewed and participated in this survey. As you can see, regarding the chemotherapy, which is a therapy that has been used for lung cancer treatment 20 years now, there are no major shortages in Western Europe. More or less all the chemotherapy was available at that time. Next slide. At the next slide, you can see that even for the chemotherapy, which has been in use for 20 years, in some parts of the Europe, especially eastern part and ex-Soviet Union countries, there is a shortage of even platinum-based agents, which are really the mainstay of the therapy and used to be in the market for 20 years. If we go to targeted therapy, next slide, the differences and disparities across the Europe are even much larger. If we focus first on the left side of the slide, you can see that in terms of targeted therapy, at the time of the survey 2014, the major targeted therapies that have been registered in Europe for 2 or 3 years were erlotinib, gefitinib, and crizotinib. And in terms of bone-modifying agents, we are talking about famidronate, zoledronate, and denosumab. And you can see that even in western part of Europe, there are some countries in which some important drugs like crizotinib were not available after 2 years after the registration through the EMA. But the major problems come on the right side of this slide. You can see that in so-called Eastern countries, the availability of targeted drugs is even much worse. There are a lot of red and black boxes. In some countries, no one of the targeted therapies have been available at that time. Next slide. If we go to the map of the Europe, it is even more visible or clearly visible that there are huge differences. More you go to the west, more it is blue, more the drugs are available. Here we are talking about the main drugs, ALK-directed crizotinib and EGFR-directed afatinib. For erlotinib, it's more or less the same, and for gefitinib. And more you go to the west, to the east, there are these red and black countries which do not have availability of these important drugs, which didn't have availability of these important drugs for their citizens at that time. Next slide. How it comes? What is the reason? The drugs need to be first tested in the frame of the clinical trials. Probably you know we have clinical phase 1 trial, phase 2 trial, phase 3 trial. It can take years for a drug to pass from phase 1 to phase 3. When the results of the phase 3 trials confirming the safety and the efficacy of the drug are known, pharma is acting usually very quickly. They send the application to FDA, to EMA, to national medicinal agencies, and they ask for registration of their drugs. In terms of registration, especially at EMA, which is covering European countries involved in European Union, the delay between the application and approval of the drug is not a major issue. It takes approximately 6 months or even less. What is a very good news, also EMA, yes, 2 years behind FDA, but still EMA adopted the policy of so-called accelerated assessment or so-called fast-track assessment for new drugs, especially for drugs that cover so-called unmet medical needs, what most of the oncology drugs are. For these drugs, now the pharma can apply for accelerated approval, and the EMA goes with conditional marketing authorization. Even faster than in 6 months, this procedure can be completed. And what is also very important to know, that EMA now can also, let's say, give the approval, marketing authorization to some very important oncology drugs after phase 2 trial. There are already drugs that are registered based on the phase 2 trials, like bevacizumab in addition to erlotinib for lung cancer. So we don't need to wait for large phase 3 trials that take years and years to be completed. Completely different is for national procedures for non-European countries. There are various and uncertain timelines, and there are no rules how long can it take. And after approval, the major nightmare comes. That's the nightmare of so-called reimbursement or endorsement by specific government or insurance to be ready to pay for these costly novel drugs. In for EU Union, we have a kind of European directive suggesting the maximum of 3 months that should elapse between the drug approval by EMA and the endorsement by a local government or insurance, by so-called decision whether the drug will be paid or not in a particular country by a particular insurance company. But even though there are still major differences from country to country in European Union, so we have some countries for which the drugs are supposed to be available immediately after approval, like Germany or UK, and there are some countries which have very long lag times between approval and reimbursement or endorsement. For non-European countries, there is a complete lack of data on endorsement regulation and procedures. So nobody knows exactly how long can it take. Next slide. So there are really different lag times between approval and reimbursement of the drugs that can take even 2 or more years, not only in Eastern countries, also in some Western countries, as you can see here, like Belgium or Italy, according to this survey that has been done in 2007, between the approval and actually the availability of the drug, particular drug in some country. Next slide. Or the point will come now. Here, I would like to stress the article that has been written by a colleague of mine from our pharmacy faculty. We did a survey in Slovenia and some selected European countries about these lag times, and it turned out that in Slovenia it can be even more than 3 years between the approval and reimbursement for some important drugs. For crizotinib, for instance, ALK-directed drug, it took our patients 20 months to get the drug, to get accessibility, availability of this drug. As you know, the prices are extreme and it's important for patients to pay it out of their pocket. And in addition to this delay, there are substantial differences in utilization of novel drugs when they are put on the reimbursement list. In Slovenia, it could be a very low utilization even after the drug is put on the list. Next slide. What's the reason for these differences or these lag times? Of course, prices are a nightmare. Here you can see that the price for the, let's say, so-called old chemotherapy regimens can be much less than the prices for targeted therapy are or prices for immunotherapy. Here are the drug costs for 30 days of treatment in my country, in Slovenia. And next slide, or the point, can you give me? Yeah, the doubling of median survival, achieved by targeted drugs is accompanied by a 20-fold increase in drug costs. 20-fold increase in the cost of the targeted therapy compared to the old chemotherapy. And when we are talking about the immunotherapy, the costs are extremely high. And even though we all know that European countries spend approximately 10% of their GDP on health, but the amount of the money spent can differ substantially from country to country because GDP is tremendously different from $7,000 to as low to $500 of expenditure per capita for healthcare. So this is a huge burden. Next slide. Next slide. There are also differences in the access to radiotherapy and radiotherapy capacity in Europe. As you can see from this very nice figure published in Lancet Oncology 2013, they did a survey and most European countries do not have the quantity and the quality of the radiotherapy that they should have. There are huge differences. We have some countries with our capacity and a lot of countries with under capacity in terms of radiotherapy. Next slide. So how to improve access to novel therapies for lung cancer patients? And I'm sure for all cancer patients is the same, but lung cancer is especially important because of these novelties in the treatment that are coming each month almost nowadays, and it's really the survival rate will improve substantially during the next 5-10 years in the societies, in the countries that will be available to get access to these novelties to their citizens and their patients. So first important thing is that we need to advocate for increased cancer control and anti-cancer drugs funding. It's very important. We should spend in Europe should spend for this major health issue, major health problem, which is called cancer, and especially lung cancer, much higher percentage of the health budget. That stands for all countries. Only 15% of cancer care costs are due to drug costs, and only 5% of the all costs related to the drugs are related to oncology drugs. So we need to increase the amount of the money spent for cancer care and spent for novel cancer drugs. Then we need shorter approval and reimbursement times across Europe. This approval and also reimbursement timeline should be, let's say, more unified, and we should have more tight timelines that should, let's say, lead our governments, insurance to take the decisions much faster. Then, of course, price negotiations, that's a major issue, and the fair European pricing policy is urgently needed. GDP is substantially different in different countries, and the pricing policy should be adapted to this. And another issue is reimbursement policies should follow the clinical benefit scale. We don't have time to go into the details, but all the novel treatments are not equally clinically beneficial. Some new novel therapies are really clinically meaningful, improve substantially the longevity and quality of life. Some are marginally efficient and not so clinically benefit. There is not such a benefit. And there is a scale now proposed by ESMO, and also all the novel drugs that come on the market are actually scored according to this scale, and that should be a tool used for with each government and by each insurance company. Then are still 2 points I would like to stress out. We need to improve organization of cancer care, and of course we need to improve the accrual into the clinical trials and cross-border access to clinical trials. Next slide. Just about the organization of cancer care, I need to share this slide with you. It's a very important slide. Here you see on the x-axis the mortality to incidence ratio. We would like to have this mortality incidence ratio all over the world to be as low as possible. But there are differences in Europe. You can see that we have especially Western countries with a very low mortality incidence ratio, and unfortunately we have some countries not so developed with still much too high mortality to incidence ratio on the right side of this slide. But for the same mortality incidence ratio, let us say for instance 0.35, the money spent is substantially different. There are countries that spend twice as much money for the same control, for the same mortality incidence ratio. So a lot of room for improvement in the terms of the organization and governance of cancer care. And the last slide, next slide, clinical trials. That's a nightmare of United Europe and a nightmare of Europe. There are a lot of new questions to be answered. A lot of new drugs are tested. And we always say we need patients to be enrolled into the clinical trials. But still, on average, only 5% of cancer patients in Europe are included in clinical trials. As you can see from these maps that have been accessed at the Clinical Trials Go, probably you know this important web page on which you can find all the ongoing recruiting clinical trials all over the world. There are also very nice maps that can tell you how many trials are ongoing in different parts of the world and in different countries. As you can see, nowadays, this week, for targeted therapy for advanced lung cancer, there are only 78 open trials in Europe, and you can see that there are some countries that have very few clinical trials open, one or even no clinical trial with targeted therapy. So the patient do not have any possibility to be enrolled in the trial. And for immunotherapy, more or less the situation is the same. I agree that for small countries like Slovenia, it's sometimes very difficult to open a clinical trial with all the cost, bureaucracy. But what we should arrange for and what we should advocate for is the access to clinical trials across the border in Europe. Patients need the access to these drugs in the frame of the clinical trials. Insurance companies, governments cannot pay for all these drugs. Patients can participate, can benefit from clinical trials, and in Europe, the borders for participation in clinical trials should be open. Next slide. So just to conclude, we need to work together, and I'm really pleased to participate in this discussion and today's webinar. We need to work together, patient advocacy groups, civil society, scientists, and pharma to improve the access to novel drugs in Europe. And one more point is here. It's a very nice quote I need to share with you, or I would like to share with you, which was given by Dr. Surya a few days ago in ESMO Perspectives. It's really unbelievable. Nowadays, we can use phone to find out the nearest pizzeria or taxi, or to hire a taxi, but we cannot find on our phone the locator of the clinical trials for cancer, and even more, we cannot find the information where the particular clinical trial that our patient, let's say my patient from Slovenia, can be enrolled even behind the borders of a very small Slovenia in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Tanja, for your presentation. It's remarkable the differences between countries in Europe, and as you saw, access to treatments is a major challenge, especially in Eastern Europe. I think that we must continue working to reduce these delays to reimbursement of lung cancer medicine, and also to reduce difference in the use of these drugs, as you say. We really appreciate to have your information and evidence, so thank you so much. One of the remarks that I want to share with you is a message received by Tom. He asked that why do the statistics for 5-year survival that you have so in your presentation are much better than the usual statistics that are cited on websites. Probably here it's important to highlight the importance to access to reliable and updated source of information.
If I may answer very quickly, of course, we need to update information. The survival rates of lung cancer patients are, thanks to God, increasing from year to year. If you go to the survival rates of patients diagnosed 10 years or 5 years ago, they are much worse than the survival rates of the patient diagnosed 3 years ago. And it's also, you need to distinguish between the national worldwide population registries, which are incorporating all the patients, and the registries, hospital register, like our hospital register is, or mutation consortium register is. That's another issue that patients, it's not the same survival. We know whether you are treated at the academic hospital with the access to clinical trials and the most novel therapies, and also the top knowledge, or you are treated in some general hospital. That's why the differences are so, let's say, high.
Thanks, Tanja. We will come back to you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now it's a pleasure to give the word to Stefania Vallone. She's a lung cancer patient advocate, president of Lung Cancer Europe, and also member of WALS, Women Against Lung Cancer in Europe. She has a lot of experience advocating for patient rights, and she's a frequent speaker in different international scientific forums. Thanks, Stefania. We really want to hear you talking from the perspective of someone who is an experienced lung cancer patient advocate. It's your turn.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody, and I'm really glad to welcome all of you on this first webinar promoted by Lung Cancer Europe. Firstly, please let me thank also Tanja and Ananda, because they were so nice to serve as a speakers today for Lung Cancer Europe, with the purpose to try to increase the knowledge of people today connected on this webinar. So what I want to say is actually that I feel that the issue related to treatment access is nowadays considered a very big challenge for thousands of people that in Europe, but more generally worldwide, are affected by cancer. Because I believe that actually this topic is not something that affects only lung cancer patients, but more in general, people affected also by other disease. And this is actually the reason because as LuCE, we decided to promote this webinar as a first and pilot educational resource. And we try to address it to patients and advocates in order to try to increase the knowledge and the awareness of them about this is actually a current and burning topic. As a patient advocate, I believe that is one of our main responsibility to try to do something concrete for encouraging and cooperating with other stakeholders. Can you change please the slide, Diego? Yeah, with other stakeholders, so with clinicians, with policymakers, with regulatory bodies, with payers, with pharmas, because I think that we should try to do something together, but something that also should take into account what are our perspectives, our experiences, and in general, our voice as a patient and patient advocates. The next one, please. In the last 15 years, we should say that actually the new advances in terms of treatments and new approaches to cancer have dramatically changed and improved the landscape of different types of the disease. If I think, for example, about lung cancer, I started about 10 years ago, and I should really say that the scenario 10 years ago was much different than now. If I think about personalized medicine, if I think about molecular testing, if I think about treatment options, and now there are different kinds of treatment options, less side effects for treatment, a quite good quality of life for people. If I think about 10 years ago, all these things were not actually the reality. So the situation now, I should recognize that we did a lot of a good step forward, and actually my hope is trying to keep on going on this direction, because actually all these new options have offered also new optimism and new hope for people who daily have to face with lung cancer. So these new therapies have not only improved the survival rate, but the most important thing, they have improved the quality of life of people. So this new drug, more tolerable for them, have a less impact on their daily life. So they let people to have a quite normal life with family, with friends, at work, and more in general in spending their normal life in what they normally do. But as also Tanja has highlighted before, there are several barriers that unfortunately still prevent people from having the same opportunities to receive early diagnosis, a fast access to appropriate treatments, and more in general, a good level of care. Because actually, these are all the elements that normally determine a good prognosis for patients. And actually, the situation persists still quite heterogeneous across Europe, causing inequities, particularly, as she said, in the eastern part of Europe. Most of these new advances are expensive, and the budgets are limited, and not always, unfortunately, the European health systems are able to afford this cost and to adapt strategies to make this treatment available for people affected by cancer. But a part of this problem, another one, is the national level access and reimbursement of this treatment that vary across Europe, causing also significant delays in the access. Actually, I come from Italy, and I can say that in Italy, because of the fragmented health system we have in our country, normally for having new treatment approved and reimbursed, we should normally wait about 2 years. So 2 years is actually a time too long for someone who is affected by lung cancer, because people are affected by lung cancer, they cannot wait. They must receive actually treatment fast in order to have some good hope of a good prognosis. The next, please. So what I really believe is that we, as patient advocates, as patients, as pharma, as a stakeholder interested in the lung cancer field, we can make a difference. But if we really want to be effective, and if we really want to be effective in influencing also the policymaker and the other stakeholder, it's important that we are prepared and that we improve also our level of education. So this is actually my hope for today, because the results that we try to design today for the patients are online. I hope that it will be useful for implementing what we really need to know in order to take action now. So I hope that Ananda could really give us a suggestion, it could really give us some more information about the way that really we can use it to implement in our knowledge. And I really thank everybody for being on the line.
Well, thank you so much, Stefania. Let's make a difference then. As you said, we need to be ready, we need to access as much training as possible to be more effective in our work as advocates. So it's a big pleasure to introduce you now to Ananda Play, Chief Executive Officer of Myeloma Patients Europe. She holds a law degree from the University of Barcelona and a master's degree in health policy, planning and fair financing from the London School of Economics and Political Science and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Her main field of interest is cross-border healthcare within the EU and health data protection. She started getting involved in patient advocacy in 2007. Since then, she has collaborated with a number of patient organizations across Europe. She has worked at the leading Institute for Public Law and the European Commission. It's a great honor to have Ananda as speaker today. And now you are not on mute, Ananda. So welcome. And
okay, I just need to know whether you see the presentation or the other side of my screen. I have two screens.
Yeah, okay, we can see your presentation, yeah.
Okay, that's good, because the other one would be not good.
No, but it's perfect. We're watching now your slides. So that's...
I have a very funny picture as a screensaver, that's why.
Don't worry about that. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot, Stefania, for inviting me to present. It's a great honor, I think, to share the experiences of MPE, and maybe you can learn from the mistakes we've done and from our hypothesis so far. My name, as you know, if you don't know me, is Ananda Plate, and I work at Myeloma Patients Europe. The first thing I'd like to do is to just give you an overview of the scope of this presentation. So in this presentation, what I'll do is to talk about the heterogeneity of access to treatment and what it actually means to patient advocacy. I will also address the key elements to advocate for access, which can be summarized into, well, the first one, producing and collecting data and evidence on the actual barriers, also on the systems, the groups that are placed, on the resources, on the priorities, and then the other element would be acquiring the needed skills to understand the data that has been collected or the data that is being published out there. And the third one would be building a strategy to advocate for issues that were identified before, so the barriers that you identified as important, and which can be then demonstrated with the evidence that you collected. So I'll use one of our key programs, as Diego said at the beginning, as an example on how this can be done. We're still in a pilot phase, I have to say, so all of this that I'm sharing with you is a bit still a hypothesis. However, it seems to be working, so we already have some success to tell you. And the program I'm talking about is the Atlas on Access to Myeloma Treatment. Finally, what I'll do is to address how all of this can be applied to the lung cancer community. Which, I mean, we try to do a little surveys, which some of you have responded to, for me to get an orientation on how the community works and what your key issues are. What I also wanted to highlight is that I will not be addressing details of definitions on HTA, health systems, prices, reimbursement policies, etc. Firstly, because I'm sure that there are more suitable people to be talking about these topics, but mainly actually because here we want to identify how LuCE and LuCE's members can start gathering evidence and how you can start working towards efficient and effective advocacy in your countries and also at a European level. So just as an overview, so you have an idea where I come from, you have the context. MPE is a network of European myeloma patient organizations. We have 40 members in actually 30 countries. I need to correct this. Representing people who have myeloma. And myeloma, if you don't know about it, multiple myeloma is a type of blood cancer that arises from plasma cells, which are a type of white blood cell produced in the bone marrow. As in many cancer types, and I heard from Tanja before, and also from the survey, myeloma also struggles with huge problems regarding access to treatment and late diagnosis. I can tell you, for instance, that approximately 10 to 20% of patients die within the first 60 days of being diagnosed. So it's quite urgent, and access is also a huge issue. So we have many differences within countries, across Europe, and so on. We repeatedly, and this is the reason why we started all of this. We repeatedly received inquiries from member organizations struggling with access to certain treatments, and the data we received from them to help them was always very anecdotal. It was based on single cases or maybe on media reports, but there was no hardcore evidence suggesting the precise barriers, the precise issues that were in place in those countries and they were struggling with, and where these barriers were and what the reasons behind those were. So just as an example, what usually you got were a phone call from some members saying, Ananda, please, I need your help. I have, there is this patient X who's not getting his medicine, and he's, gone to another country to buy it on the black market, and has had to, sell his house for doing this. And then I was requested to help them advocate at a European level to the European Commission or whatever. So for me it was very hard, and for my colleagues too, to explain to members in that moment that it was impossible with that kind of data to go to a policymaker or a regulator and have a serious discussion on these matters, because you were not taken seriously. So that was when we started to think we need to really do something about this. So if there is an issue, and there was an issue, that was for sure, we need to demonstrate that this issue exists, and we need to demonstrate where it comes from. So we thought that if despite the major advances in science, and this is also something that Tanja mentioned in the beginning, and the amazing developments of myeloma treatment over the last decade, we haven't been successful in improving access or improving the access situation, then something was fundamentally wrong. Something we were doing was not sufficient, and that we as the advocate or the advocacy community had a great responsibility, together with other stakeholders like clinicians, of finding out what it was and improving whatever was not working, so the situation could improve. So it took us several years to get the concept right, and in fact, as I said before, it's still a pilot, and to gather the data that was needed, and to find out that maybe the survey was too long and we should shorten it. All of that you can use. I can show you if you're interested afterwards. You can send me an email, and we will share anything that is useful for you, if you want to design surveys on this or anything else. So one of our first findings was that that actually, in fact, was something that we already suspected, was that MPE's member organizations had no evidence whatsoever on the type of barriers to access that existed in their countries. Some of them didn't even know how the health system worked. Also, there were so that there were many barriers to access. It was not just the fact that prices were high. So there were many access barriers to different for example, to diagnosis or to holistic care, to palliative care, and all of that was taken into account and put into you will see it afterwards, some of the indicators to which we compare to the benchmark. So this is what I wanted to say to actually get a bit of a context to all of this, and that's why I said that if it's not all about pricing, what is it that we can do? So collecting indicators, as you can see here, this is one of the charts that we created for the atlas, and as you can see, I mean, it's very small. I'll show you a bit more later on. The one you have on the top, if you can see my mouse, this one here, are the indicators that indicate the type of barriers that people were experiencing in the countries. And here on the vertical, you have the countries themselves. Afterwards, I'll show you the same chart with the GDP, so you can see a bit more within the context. But as we said, so great advances, great new drugs, that's wonderful, but it's worth nothing if these drugs do not reach the patient. So what kind of access barriers do we find? So you find patients or doctors that don't know about treatments, lack specific expertise and training within a certain country or even a certain hospital. You have patients that don't get the diagnosis they need or they don't get it in time. Patients that are often diagnosed far too late, and I think that this is an issue as well in lung cancer, as we saw from the survey. People are not referred in an adequate way or far too late. Collaboration between medical disciplines does not work as it should. When drugs are not approved yet, you have issues with trials that are not available in patients' countries. This is something that Tanja mentioned as well. Or patients are not told about the trials, or there's no access program or compassionate use program alternatively. When the drugs are approved but are not accessible because they're not in the reimbursement list or they haven't yet been on it, as this can, depending on the country, take quite a long time, and affordability and pricing issues. And so what I wanted to say now is that the myeloma community, that the heterogeneity we have among the community is of course a challenge. However, it is not only a challenge. It can also be used as an opportunity. At the beginning, it was quite difficult if you see the different challenges that countries have. So on the right side, you see the members that we have, and how different, from Western countries to Eastern countries, or even regional systems to centralized systems, or GDP-wise, the different level of resources and skills, the different priorities, and different health systems you have. So all of this can be a challenge, of course, but it can be used as an opportunity as well. So coming back to what I was telling you before, these are the type of questions we start asking started asking ourselves, and maybe this is something that is useful for you. I don't know whether, LuCE itself, or members creating a work group and starting to think about why do we still have access issues? What are the reasons behind, and why are we not as successful as we should be at a local or at a national level? Should we maybe addressing the issues to different stakeholders? Are we not involved enough maybe in the HTA processes or reimbursement decision-making processes? Does one size fit all in terms of a strategy? Because sometimes, we umbrella organizations tend to create strategies and think, okay, we'll just do one, and everyone will go with that. Well, it doesn't seem to work, and this has become evident with the work we've done with the MPE members. So the other question is, are we advocating at the right level, EU versus local? Sometimes we perceived that members had the feeling they would be much more successful and have much more impact if they advocated at a European level for some reason. So what we had to do is really scale it down and try to convince people, well, yes, we'll do it at a European level. There's no reason for not doing it. And sometimes you can have impact if you do it together, all groups together. However, what is really critical is for you to understand what is happening in your country. Who is doing what? When is he doing it? Can you be involved? If not, why not? So start changing things, start understanding things. Another kind of question, so do we have solid evidence at hand to support and strengthen our work as advocates? What kind of evidence? I mean, the evidence presented by Tanja, for instance, that's quite robust evidence. So all of that, if you gather that and you create a database, that can be very powerful. Do we have the right skills, strategy, resources to be successful in our advocacy work? Well, some of our members realized that despite being, active or having been active for many, many years and having already been successful in some areas, they still lacked some bits of, maybe project management, of how to develop a strategy for something very concrete you want to achieve. And for that, I think it is very helpful to create a tool like the one I'll show you afterwards, to guide you, to to really help you identify and focus and not get lost in the little bits that surround the priority. And the other very important question among many is, are we duplicating efforts? And that is important as well. We need to really think about who has done what. What data is already available? How can we use what is out there and do something meaningful? So this brings me to this slide, which it's sometimes not very straightforward, because when we talk about patient advocacy or evidence-based advocacy, it gives a sense sometimes that emotions and opinions are not important anymore. But that's obviously not the case. However, the recurrent request from members to advocate on their behalf at a European level were always based on these anecdotal reports and stories I was telling you before, which were worth nothing on a policy level. They might have been, useful for media articles in a sensational newspaper, or trying to raise attention at a certain point in a campaign, but would have never ever made any difference at a regulatory level, for example. And that is something that I think is worth discussing also amongst membership, to really see the importance of that evidence, and not, you know, denegate from or renegate from the emotions and the opinions, because they make us human, you know. They give the whole evidence a human face, so they're absolutely key. So this brings me to the three main roles. I hope I'm still in time. This brings me to the three main roles of the patient organizations. I've tried to summarize them here. Of course, you know, you have you're free to, you know, have more sub sections of what you think a group should be doing. We felt that this more or less divides these tasks or the operations or the roles of these patient groups very well. So you have those that support and inform patients, the individual patient, provide information, support group at a local level, very close to the patient. Then you have the advocate role, which is, you know, a bit more on the policy level for getting better patient-centric regulations and laws, and advocating for access to treatment. And then you have the role of enhancing research and really trying to collaborate internationally with clinicians and industry and help defining research priority conducts. For all of these, evidence is needed. So you can't say, well, you know, for support of the individual, evidence is not needed. No, actually for all of them, it's, you know, as important as for, you know, research, advocating for policy, or informing patients and supporting them. So we came to the hypothesis that opinions and emotions, you know, are indeed very important for our work, as they ensure that human side I was talking about of our work, and they often require for other people to understand what is at stake actually when we talk about cancer or people dying, or what does access actually mean? Well, sometimes it's very abstract, and we of course know what it means, you know, when our colleagues start dying, but for someone who's doing policy, that sometimes is very difficult to understand, you know, it's just numbers. So for that, you know, this human side is very important, but it needs to be supported by evidence. Stakeholders take their decisions based on evidence. They do not take their decision based on anecdotes. So we need to create that evidence and make our case. Now, back again to the point we were discussing before of turning challenges into opportunities. And in order for being successful, we had to, at MPE, start converting the challenges into opportunities, whether we want it or not. Whereas now, we were not as successful as we wanted to be in our work. There were still major barriers of access to treatment, or still are, major differences between countries in Europe, immense time gaps from research until the drug finally makes it to the patient, working in isolation despite having common objectives with other stakeholders. All of this creating suboptimal patient outcomes and a rather inefficient way of working on a very reactive and a very ad hoc way. There was no strategy behind. So the idea was to try to reach out to new opportunities, new approaches of how things can be done, empower patient advocates and groups with the right skills, arm them with empirical evidence so nothing can get in their way when they're trying to make their case before policymakers, for instance. And all of this in a collaborative manner with any stakeholder that actually shares our goals. For example, with clinicians. There's no reason why we shouldn't be working together to improve access to treatment. So now I come to the essential. This new approach to advocacy we have developed has three key elements, and these are evidence, skills, and strategy. on one side, the evidence we developed was based on a clinical evidence. So we had a thorough analysis of clinical guidelines, the perceived barriers to access, where we surveyed key clinicians in myeloma in each of the countries we surveyed, plus the same questions were asked to patient organizations in that country, and data underpinning the access barriers. So really some solid data on how healthcare systems work in each of the countries, what stakeholders are involved, etc., etc. So that would result in a report, a database, and an interactive map where you could see the differences also between countries and within countries. That would be supported by training. That's the Atlas coaching program and toolkit, where skills would be provided or trained. You would do some mentoring and capacity building for members to know actually how to use that evidence, because what we often saw was that evidence was, you know, published and put out there, but it was very difficult to see how you could use that evidence and how you could make it your own and make your case out of it. And then one last very important bit is the strategy. So how really, once you have identified what your barriers are, you know what your resources are in terms of time, in terms of money, you set clear and achievable goals, you set your priorities, that means, and you create a roadmap and try to improve over time. So make that something that doesn't end but improves over time. And for that we have involved a team that works with us to train our members. So here you see the different sections we have on the database. Here you see the different sections I talked about before. One is the health system interactive data, the information by country, where you can select the countries you want some information on. You can also compare countries, and then you have the set of barriers that were identified, and you can also compare the barriers and see whether they're the same as in the neighbor countries. Obviously, and this is something that Tanja also mentioned, is the need for updating that data, and we're improving constantly. So the survey is shrinking every time we redesign it, because you realize that not everything is important. There's just some key things. This is how the microsite looks. So you could just go and click. I don't have time to show you live, but you're very welcome to go and have a look yourself. It's mpeurope.org/atlas. And just have a look yourself and you try to play around. I mean, as you can see, the only one that is really disease specific is this one here. So the patient organization and experts perspective. All the others are information that you can use as well. So you're very happy to if that is useful for you, if you want some information on your health system. Okay, so here is one of the results of the survey that we did, and here you see the different indicators on the horizontal, and you see the differences between what patient organizations responded and what clinicians did. So I'm just going to amplify that so you can see that, just for you to see that some of the data we collected was statistically relevant. For instance, you could see that clinicians and patient organizations said that one of the major barriers it was not a big barrier, cost and reimbursement of standard treatments. However, when you went to new treatments, there you could see that access was again a big problem. And then here on slow drug approval process, you see that patient organizations and clinicians are not totally in line. So this is also sometimes, I think, an important piece of information to see why do patient organizations not have the same perception on the barriers than clinicians. Okay, so here is the chart I showed you before, but now it is complete. And as you can see, you have on the left, you have all the countries. On the horizontal top, you have the indicators. And then on the right vertical, you have some health economic data. So the proportion of people with self-declared unmet needs for healthcare services here. And you have some GDP information here. So you can very clearly see how Europe looks in terms of access and in terms of access barriers. With the Nordic countries and Western countries on the top, and with the more Eastern you go, the redder, meaning no access, red, green, a lot of access, it gets. Of course, this information is useful for you if you, I don't know, live in a country that has the same GDP as another one, and you see that the other one is green, but you are red. What you do not want to do, obviously, is try to, I don't know, compare here Croatia with Malta, because the GDP is very different, and because you are not comparing the same health system. So what you want to do, if ever you want to compare countries, you will always try and tend to compare countries that are from the health economic side of things in the same situation, or from the health system structure. And the same here. If I don't know, if I were Switzerland, I would, you know, ask myself, well, what is this? You know, why is this red? And that is the beauty of this kind of data. Okay, so this is the tool. Here I just want to quickly mention that the tool has, and this again, if you're interested, I can show you afterwards because I have no time now. Each of these sections, you can then click on them and you can complete them and set your priorities, and then you go and set your goals. You target the stakeholders that you want to involve. So you try to complete the whole route, the whole strategy you're going to use to tackle your issue, your problem, by looking at the data, the evidence that we have in the database. So you would, for example, go and say, okay, so what from the barriers that I have in my country, what is the key barrier I need to identify? What are the goals I need to achieve? And then what are the stakeholders involved in taking those decisions? So you would go into the database, look at the health system data and see, okay, so what stakeholders are involved in my country for taking decision X? So I need to contact them. And the database would not only say you need to contact the Ministry of Health, but it would say you need to contact, I don't know, Johnny X. This is the email address, because that gives you a very concrete possibility of action. But obviously that makes it difficult for us because it needs to be updated constantly. And then you go on, and all of this, you know, once you get to the end and you have your roadmap, you have your timeline, you know, you've done your homework, and you realize, well, you know, I achieved some of it, I didn't achieve the other. You start over again, and maybe with another, another priority, another goal, and try to improve over time. So this is meant to be something that you use as your advocacy guide, as your roadmap to do your advocacy on a day-to-day basis. It's like, I don't know, Google Maps when you go through a city you don't know. Okay, so here, yeah, it explains a bit again about the Atlas coaching program. I don't need to go into this again. So how it does it, at the moment we're still in a pilot phase, as I said. We'll have the data of the pilot, the results, by the end of this month. So that's very exciting, and I'm happy, obviously, to share that with you. The successes and also the things that didn't go so well, which hopefully won't be that many or none. So this is supported through the online tool I showed you before, through webinars, individual support. So we have a team, as I said, in Barcelona. They're constantly in touch with members and providing them support when they have questions, having calls with them, providing materials and information, and also linking, when some kind of expertise is missing, if something is not in the database and, people need to know something in order to, move a step forward, they would let us know what kind of expertise is missing, and we would then try to find that, whether it's just data or maybe an expert to talk about a certain I don't know, topic, HTA, or something much more specific, and so on. And the end product is, once we've done the pilot, is to really open this up to all NPE members and hopefully, to have this as something that that will be used on a day-to-day basis. So here, just a short mention on the methodology. I don't think this is super important for you. I think maybe this is just important for maybe for the LuCE organizers, in case you want to do something like this. I think the only important thing about this whole methodology is that obviously using something that is recognized. So here in this case we used a general methodology for quality improvement. It's one that the Institute of Healthcare Improvement uses. Sorry. But also what is I think key is that it's a very quick cycle of work. It's not something long. You can really move on quickly and do your tasks quickly and your timeline. And the other factor is it's a continuous improvement. So you have a constant monitoring. And the other one is that you have peer-to-peer learning, and that I think is something new. So you monitor, you benchmark, for example, with a participant X, and they then come back and tell the group also and try to share that with the group on what worked better, what didn't work. And that has proven to be quite useful. So people are much more open to learn based on examples of what worked and what didn't work than just on theory. Sorry, I need to drink some water.
Don't worry, Ananda. Take your time.
Yeah, I'm losing my voice. Okay, so just to come to my conclusions, I think I have one slide after this. So from the message I want to get through today is really that access issues are very complex and very country specific. So it's not sometimes, when you start, you go to meetings and meet industry, and it is all reduced to pricing, which is not the case. It's much more complex. It does play obviously a very big role, but we've seen that it is much more complex and has many more dimensions. And the country-specific issue is very relevant, because once you understand that, you also understand that each of the strategies you develop need to be specific to your needs, to your country, to your resources, to the stakeholders, to your culture, to make it successful. To date, advocacy on access to treatment hasn't solved the issue. That's true. We have had some successes, but it hasn't been for us as successful as we had wished it to be. And our hypothesis is that advocacy will only be effective if we collaborate, we join our forces, we have a thorough understanding of the underpinning issues and barriers, so what is happening in our country, have empirical evidence to demonstrate what is happening, and build a strategy, targeted solutions, and have the skills to actually move forward and implement that strategy. And then one of the key elements as well is support of the implementation at local and national level. So not just, throw evidence out there and then leave people alone, because that doesn't work. So that is my conclusion for evidence-based advocacy. So just, some of the thoughts I had after reading the survey results. I went through them. It was very helpful because I got to understand a little bit how your community works, what your issues are, and it was a shame that we only had 7 responses. And I really encourage LuCE to, do the survey not only to member groups, but to any cancer patient organization that deals with lung cancer in Europe, to really get responses of as many countries as possible. That I think would be very useful for you to find out what is your next move going to be, and what are the real needs of members in terms of access to treatment, which will be very different from one country to another. But at least mapping them, having that atlas, helps you to have an overview. So from these 7, 85%, which I think is 6, if I'm not mistaken, I was never good in maths, but I think I can do that, have knowledge only on approved medicines for some types of lung cancer and not for all of them. So for me, I mean, it's quite interesting to see that. And I have no idea why that is the case, because I don't know your community well enough, but I think that this data proves that maybe, I don't know, a lot of attention is given to one and not to the other, or maybe the other just, doesn't have any, I don't know, but I think it's worth, just having a look at that. Maybe industry is very interested in giving attention to one of those developments and not the other. I don't know, but at least I think it's worth noting. Then also something that was striking was that there was a low awareness about the price of drugs and development pipeline. I saw that Tanja had very good data on that, so I think that this might be something you would want to, I don't know, include maybe in your next report, or even do some infographics, or do maybe even a webinar on something like that. Then awareness about the alternative ways of access. The trials, compassionate use, named patient programs, and I think that there, from that data, which obviously, I mean, I'll send to you afterwards, there is some, there's something that can be extracted to work on. As from an advocacy point of view. Then the other one was late diagnosis, where 85% again said that it was self-caused, the delay by the patient, and that the main causes of this, self-caused delay of diagnosis was that the stigma and not having taken the symptoms seriously. So maybe there is an opportunity for, I don't know, raising awareness on, the importance. I have no idea, but I think it's interesting to see that that is a quite striking number. And the other one was that there was no involvement in HTA appraisals or reimbursement decision procedures, which is, I think, a key. If you advocate for access in your country, is try to become involved in these decisions, or at least know how they work. And I know that some countries are very difficult in these, but at least annoy these people, try to put your foot in the door, and make yourself heard. Bring data to the table that might be relevant to them, because maybe they just don't see the opportunity of involving patients. But if you really bring something to the table that makes their decision easier, then you might have an opportunity. So in the reasons for non-involvement that were indicated in the survey by you was that you do not know the system well enough, and that you haven't been given a chance of participating. And I think that this is, quite a relevant reply. I think there's something that needs to be done. So please have a look at the database of, health systems of the atlas we have, to get to know your system well and try to see whether you can be involved, and if you can, how you can become involved. And if you don't know how to start, just ask LuCE. They'll tell you. Then 85% indicated that they have good relations with clinicians, and that is obviously something very good, and it also comes back to the point from challenges to opportunities, whether there is not an opportunity for advocating jointly. And I mean, we've had very good experience at MPE for advocating when there was a shortage, for instance, with Vallone, where all clinicians we had contact with jointly with the patient groups across Europe really demanded responses and wrote a letter to the authorities. I think that there is opportunity here. If you have such good relations, share the data you have and share the priorities and also the way towards evidence-based advocacy. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Ananda. And really, we want to congratulate you for this great project, the European Atlas of Access to Myeloma Treatment. I agree that we need to get data and evidence for an effective work as advocates, and tools like the Atlas, I think that they are really, really useful, not only for multiple myeloma patients, but also for all patients, because as you say, we will find a lot of national health system data, and it would be very useful. We really appreciate your recommendation and guidelines, specifically for LuCE, that we will take into account. And as a patient advocate I really love your reflections about the right level we advocate, if we are advocating at the right level. I love that reflection, and also the duplication of efforts and resources, the different perceptions about barriers of access to treatments, and I really, the MP advocacy roadmap, of course, I will follow things now, because I really agree, and I think that's a very good tool to advocate for access to treatments. Well, now it's time to questions and comments, so I encourage all of you to participate, to solve doubts, make suggestions, or say comments. Remember that you can write them, you can write your comments and send to me through the window on your screen. And if you have microphone, you can raise your hands and we will activate your sound. Ananda, Tanja, and Stefania, I'm going to activate your microphone, so feel free to talk whenever you want, okay? And just to encourage people to ask questions, we have received a message from Tom who reflects about the potential problems that can happen between two neighbor countries when a specific treatment is available in one of them and not in another one. And he, for example, talked about the differences between Scotland and England. I don't know if some of you want to comment about that.
Yes, certainly. This is always, I think, very tricky. I mean, especially, you know, in the UK, but if you take other countries with similar GDPs, neighbor countries, and you compare these countries, it is, I think, not very comfortable for the authorities, but I think it also is a great tool of putting pressure on those authorities to say, look, you know, they have it, we don't. Then obviously there are other issues you need to look into, which is, you know, how are these approved and what do they take into account when they evaluate a drug to see whether it's going to be reimbursed or not. So sometimes, you know, these questions asked by the reimbursement authority are very different from one country to another. So you can't compare. But all of that, you need to obviously have a look at both countries. If they're comparable, then it is very powerful data. Yeah.
Ananda, Stefania, Tanja, one of the issues that LuCE highlights on the LuCE report on lung cancer that is available on the website is the need of introduce new flexible payment procedures in pricing and reimbursement negotiations. Do you think that pharma and European governments are now more open to discuss new payment approaches that facilitate a faster access to treatments?
This is Tanja. Pricing is a very tough issue, and I'm not quite sure that pharma is very open to negotiate prices with different countries. But I will come back to main point. I still think it's very feasible if we would really stick together and work on it. That's the access to novel therapies through the clinical trials. There are so many clinical trials, also phase 3, phase 4 trials, that if the patient would have access across the borders, that would improve the general access to novel therapies much more. In terms of pricing, probably the changes should be made in terms of, let's say, we have some clusters in Europe. I don't know, our prices in Slovenia are the starting point for the prices in the neighboring countries. So probably we need some clusters and some pricing according to the clusters of GDP.
Yeah, I believe that Benelux has already started doing this, no? And it seemed to work. And I found that concept pretty interesting. But anyway, I had one comment to make to Tanja, which was related to when you talked about, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful to have an app to locate clinical trials? I absolutely agree. I mean, you know, navigating as a patient, I've been a patient myself, navigating clinicaltrials.gov is the nearest thing to a nightmare when you haven't done it before. I know that at the moment, and I'm involved as well in on this is that there's being created by Rare Cancers Europe an app, which will probably, I mean, it's still in a pilot phase, so I can't talk a lot about it. But if you're interested, we can speak afterwards. And hopefully, it will, include information not only for advocating, so not a tool for advocacy, but a tool for patients and for clinicians on, where is a certain drug available, where is a clinical trial available, what are the criteria, if you live in country X, can I go cross the border to get access to that clinical trial? Because often what you see is that you don't have this data in the criteria. It's very confusing for patients when when you ask your doctor that you want to be part of a certain clinical trial, and it's not and you don't know whether you're going to be reimbursed the journey to the other country, whether they'll even accept you, and it's not part of the cross-border healthcare directive. So so hopefully that will work, and if it comes out, I'll share that with you.
That's
like
great.
To add something.
Sorry.
Something about database and clinical trial database and app, because actually that was one of the project that LuCE in the past was thinking about. Then after, for several different reasons, we can say we didn't arrive till the end, but actually I believe that exactly in this moment when there are so many different treatment options and so different opportunities for treating patients, it's maybe very important to start again, put on the table this project and to design and create something that could be useful and easyable for our patients, because as Ananda said, the other database is not really patient-friendly, is not really easy to find what you are looking for, because then you have to open several pages before you get the information you are looking for. And as an Italian experience, we had in my organization a database for lung cancer clinical trials in Italy. And actually, I know that it's something that patient really needs, to have something easy to manage, and especially to have contacts of people where they can directly have a conversation, maybe a visit, and to know which kind of clinical trials are available for their situation, to save time that in these cases are very important.
Yeah. I mean, we also thought about it, and we then backed off because of the fact that, if you have something like this, it needs to be super updated. It has to be, you need to have the information there, but it has to be accurate information in a timely manner, and it needs to be updated very often. And we struggled with, in the idea of being able to ensure that service. So we backed off, but I think it's a great service. I mean, having such a database is a really cool thing to have. Yeah.
We have another question related to the need to get evidence and collect data. Ananda, but also Stefania and Tanja, if you want to answer, it would be great. How can patient organizations monitor the correct implementation of the European Cross-Border Healthcare Directive? Do you think it's feasible to exchange data between patient organizations about real cases of barriers to access to treatments?
I think so. I think it's useful. So we're planning to collect this data among the blood cancers within a European reference network, EuroBloodNet, because it's not existing at the moment. So this data was, or at least the Commission tried to collect this data. I don't know whether they have and whether they published a report on it, but the reality is that it's not working in all the cases, and it's not only not working because the cross-border healthcare directive is far from being ideal, but because it's not being implemented in some of the countries, in the way it should. And usually it has to do, with late late responsiveness, so non-responsiveness, or having contact points at a national level that don't work as they should. But I don't think it's been collected. So it's an interesting, suggestion. But once you have that, I think the Commission would be very interested in that data. I think they, because that's the only, they have very little power when it comes to healthcare, and that would be one, at least, where they can do something about it. So.
Well, Evelina, our colleague in LuCE, Evelina, also sent a message. She says, thank you so much for your great lecture. I find it very useful. One problem I think is key in national patient organization is not many patient advocates due to short life expectancy. Having in mind the above, it's difficult to do complex advocacy in three key roles Ananda was talking about. Many patient organizations remain support groups with not many possibilities to grow in advocating in policy making, for example. Do you have any suggestion how could we address the society to gain more volunteers or gain our workforce otherwise? Thanks, Evelina.
Ooh, so tricky question. I mean, we struggle with that as well. It's also, much easier for us at a European level to gather funding to, to have a couple of employees, and that is not something you take for granted at a national level. It doesn't happen that often, and we also struggle with the fact that, we've lost, for instance, 2 board members in the last 8 months. So I hear you, Evelina. I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't have a solution, but I guess that involve, creating a second generation of people that are involved. I think is key. So to really educate a second generation that at the moment might not be at the level, but you might have family members that have the time or have the energy or are angry enough with the system to want and hungry for knowledge, whom you can teach how this works, and that might be a bit more permanent. But I have, not a magic bullet for that one. I don't know. Maybe even Diego would know more and better because he knows much more about volunteers than I do.
But to be optimistic, the things are getting better in lung cancer. People are living longer, the quality of life is better, and so we just need to be active and to make people be involved in these organizations. And on the other hand, unfortunately, also younger people are getting lung cancer, but they are very good advocates. They are very familiar with the net and all these applications. So we need to keep working on the, let's say, enrollment of the advocates, and we will improve in lung cancer. When I started 30 years in oncology, we started with breast cancer group facing the same problems. Nowadays it's much better, and I'm sure in lung cancer it will be much better in a few years. And even relatives, it's very important. They can be a very good advocate.
Sorry to say that we don't have more time for questions. Please, if you have further questions, contact with LuCE and we will send them to the speakers. Before ending this webinar, I want to give the opportunity to the 3 speakers to say a final conclusion or opinion, starting with Tanja. Is there something that you want to highlight today?
I have a very nice impression after this discussion. It's wonderful what the Society for Myeloma did. We already have data, so the Lung Cancer Patient Association need to work on this, to build on this, and together I think the situation in lung cancer control will be much better in 10 years or even 5 years in Europe.
Thanks a lot, Stefania. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tanja. So, Stefania, something to add about access to lung cancer treatment or about this webinar?
Yeah, actually, I would like really to thank the two speakers. I really feel optimistic about the future of LuCE and about the future of lung cancer patients. I think that if we keep on working together step by step, as we did in the last 3 years, I think that may be not easy, not very fast, but we could really reach some good outcomes for patients.
Thank you so much. And finally, Ananda, any final message that you want to highlight?
Well, I think I've said everything I had to do, but the only thing that maybe, to highlight is that really I get the sense that LuCE has a great opportunity here. As Tanja said, things are improving and people are living longer. And that's why I think that the opportunity is to really create a pool of advocates, who can be your army in advocating for access, create the evidence, give and provide skills, and help people to develop a strategy. And and you can rock it, I think.
Well, thank you so much to Tanja, Stefania, and Ananda for this valuable webinar, and thanks to all of you to share this time with us. Remember that the video of this webinar will be available soon, and we will send you an email to inform you. We hope that you have learned and enjoyed this webinar, and we encourage to continue working together to face this important challenge as is the access to lung cancer novel therapies. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.